Welcome to the Shun Podcast, where we expose religions that use shunning as a tool to control people. I know the show typically focuses on the lives of Jehovah's Witnesses because that's my community. But, the reality is, as we've already seen through a few episodes with other groups, other religions, other cults, shunning isn't something that's only used by Jehovah's Witnesses. My goal from day one has been to expose groups that use shunning as a tool to control people. And I didn't want people to feel alone, not only in their own group, us as Jehovah's Witnesses, but I've always wanted to show that there are other groups out there that, participate in some of the same things. There are a lot of similarities between all of these groups. So, the group of Shun Jehovah's Witnesses, we're not alone. There are other groups out there that are doing the same thing. And I hope that the show is available to kind of highlight the similarities that we all have. I was fortunate enough recently, I had someone by the name of Torah Bontrager reach out to me. She's a speaker, the founder of the Amish Heritage Foundation. She's been on MTV True Life, the Tim Ferriss Blog, Forbes.com, the Huffington Post. And she contacted me, and now, I'm going to share her story on the Shun podcast, which is pretty cool. So, I learned a lot through this interview. Torah has an Amish conference that is going to be coming up pretty soon. And, part of the goal of that conference is for the Amish to take back their own story so that they can tell it themselves. Not everything that you hear is necessarily accurate from a secular perspective. They have things like I didn't know the Amish have their own language. Their language isn't Swiss. It's not German. It's not necessarily Dutch or whatever. It's Amish. They have their own language that they've developed over time. There are things that are misconceptions that we have in a secular world that they want to correct. And so in this interview, you're going to learn about the Amish. You probably learned some new things. I know I did. You're also going to learn about Torah because, my podcast is about people telling their own stories, their own personal stories. So I wasn't just interested to learn more about the Amish. I wanted to learn about Torah. I wanted to meet Torah and to see what she's been through in life and what her journey has been. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and meet Torah.
My name's Torah Bontrager. I was raised in the Amish church. I literally escaped in the middle of the night, and I'm shunned by my family, community, people I grew up with.
All right, Torah. So, I normally ask people, how did you come into the religion? Were you born into this? From what I understand, that's typical, how it usually works.
Yes. So I was born into the Amish. All my grandparents were Amish. Still were. I think they've all passed away now. So they were all inside the Amish church, remained practicing members. All of my mother's side of the family, the immediate family, my aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them are still inside the church. Most of my aunts and uncles on my father's side, in fact, all my aunts, but 3 of my uncles on my father's side. I take that back. The aunts are all practicing Amish in the church. 3 of the uncles have left, and the rest of the uncles are inside, so the majority of them on that side. And most of my cousins on my father's side of the family as well. And here's an interesting twist. 5 years after I escaped, my parents decided that it's okay for them to resign from the Amish church, but I'm still going to hell. And I have had no contact with them for 5 years, I believe. And that took place, the last time that they contacted me, I had to call the police to get them to stay away because they just wanted to proselytize and convert me to their religion. They're now fundamentalist evangelical right-wing fanatics, which is a trend, very alarming trend that's going on within the Amish, for those who escape or leave or resign, whichever one of those three it is, lots of them are co-opted by the religious right and get funneled into the born again system.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a unique twist. I mean, that your parents would be okay with leaving themselves, but still shun you. I wouldn't have expected that whatsoever.
Yeah. Usually, everybody's parents are different. How accepting or tolerant they are of you or not, like what your interaction is with your parents if you're a child that leaves, that varies from family to family and community to community. It's sort of, first of all, depends on whether or not the community's on the more strict or liberal end within the range of Amish rules, or if your parents personally are a little bit more tolerant. And whichever the case may be, usually after 10, 20 years, the parents mellow out a little. They become a little warmer, more receptive if they didn't before. My parents, the exact opposite. My father is just, there's no word even remotely positive to describe him.
Wow. Okay, so then let's talk about that. Let's talk about your parents, your family growing up Amish. You've mentioned that there are different types of communities, or some are more strict, some are a little more liberal. For you, being raised that way, how did it make you see the world? What was it like being raised? Was your family or your community more liberal, more strict, and how did that make you see the world around you?
So I was born into the strict end of the range within the church. And just for a little bit of context, there's no central governing authority among the Amish that sets the rules that's universal for every Amish church. So it's not like the Catholics, the Pope, and the Vatican, for example. Within the Amish, the only universal rules are no electricity, no cars or motorized vehicles for transportation. You have to drive a horse and buggy. For personal transportation, you can hire someone to drive you around in their car, but you can't drive yourself around in a car.
Okay.
And then no cameras. Those three rules seem to be the only universal rules that apply to every single church. If someone has electricity or someone has a car, drives themselves around in a car, buys one and gets one, and so forth, and if someone has a camera, now you're no longer Amish. Okay. And so I was born on the strict end of the hierarchy of rules. And that meant, for example, that I grew up in a community, or was born into a community that did not allow bathrooms, indoor bathrooms. So I would run out to an outhouse to go to the bathroom. And that, rain, sun, summer, winter, fall, snow, you went out to the outhouse. Or of course, during the winters, you use a chamber pot. They think back in the Victorian days, I guess.
Oh wow! So you all actually used that then?
Yes, that's how I was. That was the community I was born into. The church type of church I was born into.
Okay.
And then when I was around, and we also didn't. We didn't have running hot water. We did have running cold water, and we didn't have gas stoves, for example. Everything was cooked on a wood-burning stove or kerosene, something, little burners that were lit with kerosene. So then when I was around 10 years old, my parents moved to a more modern community. And in terms of the range, once again, of the different rules, it was towards the very modern, liberal end of the Amish church. And that meant we now had indoor bathrooms, we had running hot water, we had propane-powered stoves, like propane gas stoves, and refrigerators. That was a big, huge deal. It's like, oh my God, we have a refrigerator. I don't know how to imagine or think about this, but that's a big deal to jump from no fridges to fridges, because especially for a big family, when you have a family of minimum 6 kids on average to any up to 14, which is not unusual, you're having to cook food, grow food, preserve food, I mean, everything revolves around putting food on the table or somehow preserving it. And once you have a fridge, now you can prepare more because you can freeze it. Certain things can be frozen that you would not be able to preserve.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So your diet changes, and along with that, also more. I've noticed looking back, we start eating more toxic food and growing less, getting a little lazier for some reason. So that's one of the negatives, I would say, of
Oh yeah, everything gets easier, and then it's easy to pick up processed things and stuff like that.
Yeah, lots of processed stuff, which is not good. And then, the other thing that was unusual about that community was that we were also allowed to have bikes, which meant that I would be using a bike to go everywhere instead of having to hitch up the horse and buggy. And we kids could bike to school, and we could bike to go up to the Amish neighbors and get some milk, because I didn't grow up on a farm. And so we got all our milk from our Amish neighbors, and we also had phones in the barn. So God was fine with phones in the barn, but we couldn't have them in the house. If they were in the house, we'd go to hell. So, that's crazy.
You're walking a line there, weren't you? So let me ask you, so as a child, growing up in the more strict environment,
Mm-hmm.
how, what was your feeling? I mean, were you happy in that environment because it's all that you knew, or did you feel deprived? What was family life like when you were in the strict environment, and then compare and contrast that with how it became once you got more modern?
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel personally?
Well, personally, I was very happy for the more modern conveniences.
Yeah.
Of course, who wouldn't want running hot water and indoor bathrooms and fridges and stoves that didn't reek of kerosene fumes? And
Yeah. Is that something though that you even knew existed when you were in the stricter environment?
I knew about. Actually, that's a very good question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you felt deprived, because if you don't know that it exists, then it's hard to feel deprived because it's just normal, of course.
Exactly. Yes. No, I did feel deprived, because when I was around 3 years old, between 3 and 4, around that age, for a brief period of time, my parents lived on an English farmer's in an English farmer's house. And English, by the way, is anybody who is not Amish. Doesn't matter if you're Chinese, you're African, you're Asian, you're European, whatever. You're English if you're not Amish.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can understand how that would be.
And so my father, for a brief period of time, was working for an English farmer. And we rented their little house on the farm that was attached to the main farm. And that was a temporary rental until my father bought our own house, because we'd moved from one community to a neighboring state. So it was like a temporary fix until my parents got their own house. So during that period of time, between 3 and 4 years old, around that age, I was living in a house with electricity and hot water, running hot water, bathroom, and fridge and stove and all of that kind of stuff. Of course, I was too young to appreciate a gas or electric stove versus not, but I did understand, what was going on, that this was different from our Amish house. or the Amish houses are. And the thing that I remember the most, now that you're making me go back into memory land, is the carpet, the rug, the floors were carpeted. That is what I remember that sticks out to me the most. That and being in the tub, in the bathtub, with the running hot water. But really, the carpet sticks out to me the most, and I know why, because when we moved to our own house, we were not allowed to have carpets. We could have like kitchen area, little tiny rugs or whatever, but most of our floors were exposed. And it would get cold in the winters, and 40 below zero Wisconsin cold back in the days before climate change took over. Those floors were freezing, and we kids grew up running around barefoot during the summer, and during the winters, you're on these cold floors, and you don't have central heating, and the wood burning heat is not very efficient. It doesn't circulate very well. So I was always cold.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've got a taste of the modernity, and then went backwards into a more austere environment once you got your Amish home.
Exactly. Yes. And also the other thing in terms of wondering if I knew I was deprived or felt deprived was yes, because once again, we did not live in physical communes, completely physically isolated from the rest of the world. We would see things in the grocery stores in town. We'd go to a hardware store. We'd see appliances, things like that. And we also, when we went on long trips or trips that were too far away for a horse and buggy to travel, we would go in a nice heated car or a van. And the difference was very clear in my mind. There was that contrast of what we were allowed, weren't allowed, and how much nicer the outside was.
So I know, I try to think about things in terms of what I've experienced. And I know, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses growing up, we weren't allowed to celebrate birthdays or Christmas or anything. and for us, we would see other kids getting gifts for their birthday or having a party or whatever for Christmas, all of the celebration. And so, that was something that we would look at and kind of feel left out of. And so, I think I can understand on a level what you're talking about. It has to be hard. Do you think that are most kids in that environment aware of the outside world and feeling kind of left out, or do you feel like sometimes we would feel left out, of course, but we would justify it like, well, but we're doing it right, and that's and they're doing it wrong. So was it kind of a similar thing in your situation?
So in my, I can't speak for all the other kids.
Sure. I didn't know if these are stories that circulated or not. Yeah.
Right. Well, I know for all the kids who escape or leave or resign, yes, they at some point felt that, and I do know that there are a lot of kids, especially once you hit adolescence, teens, that kind of age, where we're not happy, but you see that more among the boys than the girls, because the boys are more exposed to the outside, especially if they don't grow up on farms. So over the course of my lifetime, the Amish have become far less agrarian. They've had to give up their farms because they can't compete with big agriculture. Yeah. And they've had to move to more construction work, for example, or in the most modern communities, they'll work in factories. The boys will, for example, modern factories, furniture, RVs, whatever the case may be. And so they get exposed to that. It's okay for the boys to be in that environment. It's not okay. It's wrong if the girls are in that environment. So you will see that. I saw that where there was a lot more signs of dissatisfaction among the boys. Among the girls, there is a significant number as well, but it's harder to detect because there's this element of um, you don't know who you can trust, especially if you're a girl, because women are second-class citizens. We are, by virtue of being born female, we have no rights. We are literally required to obey our husband as part of the marriage vows and to actually follow through on that. It's not just, lip service. So we have no rights. We're not allowed to uh, even consider going against the rules. Whereas the boys, it's a little bit more like, well, they have to do this in order to make a living. Oh, well, they have to be in this environment to make a living. So, yeah, maybe they'll be using electric powered tools on the work site, even though it's not allowed in the home. And women are just don't have that exposure. And then you also don't know who you can trust to talk to if you're unhappy about something. That was my situation in particular, was that I didn't know who I could trust. I had to just keep everything inside and pretend to be the perfect good girl and toe the party line. And that was really my best shot at making a successful escape when I did make the attempt.
Okay, so you mentioned the not knowing who you can trust.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the repercussions if you told the wrong person how you felt? Is this what is the situation? So,
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed someone who was a former Mennonite, and he said that, or a non-practicing Mennonite, and he said that he in their culture, they would, if somebody found out something about you, it was literally brought up before the congregation at times, and everyone kind of decided your fate. Is this a similar situation with the Amish?
If you're a baptized member of the church, yes, and you
Okay.
break the rules or do something, say something or do something that is frowned upon, yes. Then if someone finds out about it and has a problem with it, and they report it to the bishop or whoever, and they bring it up in their church members only meetings, and you have to confess and ask forgiveness, and in the worst case, if the sin or error or whatever is considered to be really grave, then you're excommunicated for 6 weeks, and that's actually the highest sentence you can get, form of punishment, being excommunicated for 6 weeks, and then theoretically you're no longer breaking the rules and you're back in good standing after 6 weeks. But in the case of someone like me who was never baptized in the church, I can't be commanded to go and confess before the congregation.
Oh, so you've got a little extra layer of protection there, a little
Well,
buffer.
not really.
Oh, really?
Depends on the family. So I will tell you what happens when you tell the wrong person that you want to leave, and that person turns out not to be trusted. That happened with the girl I thought was my friend. So I had two friends in when I was a teen in that modern, more liberal community. And I told, her name's Rosanna, and I think she's still, I mean, if you were to find her and track her down, she, by the way, got married, and she and her husband, after marriage, resigned from the church. So she was very unhappy as a teenager. We both were.
Okay.
So I thought that I could, trust her, because she was unhappy about it too, and she was talking about wanting to leave, and I would talk to her about my unhappiness. She was the only one I would talk to, and thought, of course, that I could trust. Well, she I don't know what happened exactly, except that something happened. Maybe she got caught, or her parents she got outed by somebody for expressing something about wanting to leave, and she ratted me out.
Take the
And
pressure off of herself.
yes, and I was working at her parents' bakery that summer, so I think I was maybe 13 or 14. I can't remember how old I was, but I was working at her parents' bakery that summer. I come home one night, bike home from work from the bakery, and I walk into my room and it is ransacked. It's like somebody from the Gestapo was rifling through everything. The drawers were rifled through, the bedspread was messed up, and the bed was, sort of, the mattress was shaken up or whatever, like moved. Everything. I looked in all my secret places, and all my contraband had been confiscated. And I go back downstairs. It was like my mother didn't say anything to me when I had first walked in. It was just sort of hi. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know this was what had happened. And my father comes in, and that night, like it was hell. It was interrogation. Like, I don't know how to describe what happened, except that it was as if I had been living in Nazi Germany or Soviet, Russia, and some police or authority officer or somebody broke into my room and stole all my contraband and took me into this room and interrogated me and psychologically tortured me, using, telling me I'm going to hell. Why did you do this? Tell me all of this. And what else have, here. And I was sitting at the table and all the rest of the kids had been dismissed and sent into their rooms. And it was just me and my parents, my father, my mother sitting there. And they're actually my ex-parents. I can't call them my parents anymore at all, ever, really. But so they're sitting there, and it was just, here was a pile of things on my father, like dumps all the stuff that he confiscated, everything he thought was breaking the rules or wanted to see anyway, like my diary. There was a dress that to this day, I don't know why he grabbed a dress that I had made, but because it followed all the rules of it, but that's another story. It was like, basically, I refused to wear it because as an act of like protest against the hypocrisy of the rules. But yeah, everything was dumped on the table. And
so your contraband consisted of basically a diary and a dress?
Diary, a dress, a radio that I had bought on the down low. I had sneaked, bought it on the sly.
Yeah.
And yeah, and letters from one of my friends in a different state that she and I wrote these letters, and she wasn't happy either.
But it's just so sad that that's all it takes to be considered, quote, contraband. I mean, it sounds like something, oh wow, it's just so tough to hear that it takes so little to create such a massive wave of, essentially, it's almost like persecution towards you.
It is persecution. That's why I use like these words like Nazi Germany and the Gestapo and interrogation and torture, because that is what it was. I'm, a teenager, 13, 14 years old, and I'm not allowed, like, I'm in an oppressive situation, in an oppressive institution that does not allow me to have any rights simply because I was born a female. And that does not allow me to express myself creatively. And that does not allow me to learn, does not allow me to question or think. Like, all those things are considered sin, and such sins so bad that you're going to go to hell when you die. You're lucky if you go to heaven. Like, let's just hope that we get to heaven.
So you mentioned there's something about not being able to express yourself creatively. Is that so? From what I understand, the the ban on cameras is because, all glory goes to God. You shouldn't be taking any for yourself. So does that, I don't know if that's accurate or not, but does that also apply then to, other creative endeavors as far as, I mean, I don't know, can you
Mhm.
paint or draw or
Yeah.
portraits or
Yeah.
something?
Yeah, so the reason that we're not allowed to have cameras is because of one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not have any graven images before me.
Okay.
That's why in the Amish, because pictures, photos of ourselves are considered idols, graven
So it
images.
is about giving, yeah, taking away, detracting from the glory of God because some of it might go to you.
Well, no, actually, no, that's not that's a different mindset.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is considered worshiping idols. Like it would be like creating a statue and worshiping a statue and calling that God. It's having photos of oneself
Okay.
is considered that.
Okay. And so does
Yeah.
that then apply also to, I mean, just because you mentioned the creative endeavors, it makes me think, obviously, you mentioned like making a dress and how it had to be to certain standards.
hmm
Um, uh,
Yeah. So let's talk about the dress, for example. That we're not allowed to have bright colors depending on, once again, the specific church you're in. The stricter the church, the darker the clothes. And the more modern end, they will have light greens and blues and sometimes red. Um, you don't see that quite as often. But some Amish churches do allow that color. And some maybe tan, version of brown, the light brown.
yeah.
So you can tell by the style of dress and the color of the clothes exactly what kind of community that an Amish person comes from, how strict, how modern. And in terms of the dresses, so we sew all our own clothes. We don't go, there's no such concept as going to a store and buying our clothes. And every community has its rules as in terms of how long the dress has to be, how many inches off the floor a girl's or a woman's dress has to be, literally how many inches, like 6 inches, 4 inches, whatever, and it cannot be even a quarter inch off.
Yeah, very strict. So then I'm assuming is there any creative expression? Are you allowed to, be a painter or sing songs that aren't maybe biblical songs or whatever?
Right.
Like,
So it depends again from community to community, the
right,
church and the family itself.
right,
And in general, first of all, you're not allowed any musical instruments. So I grew up without any musical instruments except the harmonica, and that was only in the more strict community. Some of the stricter communities allow harmonicas, but the more modern you get, it's almost as if, well, to make up for allowing other nice things, we have to ban something else to.
oh, that makes sense.
So from age 10 onward, we were not supposed to have harmonicas anymore. We're supposed to get rid of them. That said, my parents' harmonica stayed in their little drawer in their bureau in their bedroom. They never got rid of it. They kept it. They weren't allowed. They didn't play it, but they didn't throw it away, which was, you know, one of the hypocritical things that
hmm
I was protested against and wasn't happy about. It's like, okay, so you're stealing my dress, but you have a harmonica. My dress is per code. It's up to I made it per code, but you burn it. And yes, that's what happens. So after the long, like, hours and hours of torture and screaming and you're going to go to hell, my father takes all the stuff, scoops everything up off the table, throws it into a big plastic garbage bag, and takes it outside, grabs a gasoline, not kerosene, gasoline, and dumps it in a big bonfire and lights it up and makes me watch it. Watch what, everything got burned, all the letters, my journal, which I was going to print once I escaped. Like I knew I would want to someday go back and read those things, and all of that got burned.
That's just, I'm sorry. That's so it's such an emotionally abusive situation there
Yeah, yeah,
basically say, here's your shame, watch it burn. That's
yeah. It's
awful.
just, yeah. And in terms of, oh, so I want to answer the thing about painting. Like for example, painting was allowed, and that's a interesting question because when I was around 14, I actually learned how to oil paint with oils, and that community, in the more strict ones, that was not allowed, but in the more modern one, throw away the harmonicas, but now you're allowed to oil paint. And
It's so arbitrary.
so I did learn how to do that when I was 14, and that was the one thing that helped me make it through until I escaped. It was the only creative outlet I had. Um, I would sit down and I would express myself. Like I could just get lost in the painting. It was like this sort of Zen moment. It was
Oh
the
yeah.
only time that I could just ex, uh, exit from, remove myself from all the problems and unhappiness and all of that.
So you had mentioned earlier, the difference between someone who was baptized and someone who, had never gotten baptized. It sounds like from early on you kind of knew that this wasn't for you and that you didn't want to get baptized. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely, yes. So I was, uh, I believe, I'm okay. Let me start over. I'm trying to think of my ages here. I was 11 when I made the conscious decision to escape. That was when I realized that my dreams were not compatible with the Amish church. I could not ever fulfill my dreams and hopes if I stayed inside the church. And I also realized at that point that I had always been thinking these things when I was a little kid. I had this very vivid imagination. I would read all the books I could get a hold of. So I didn't learn English until I was 6 years old and went to Amish school. And I couldn't wait to read. I couldn't wait to go to school so I could read, so I wouldn't have to depend on my mother for bedtime stories. And as soon as I got into school, I learned my ABCs as quickly as possible, and I was reading several grades ahead. And that was how I learned more. It was the only access I had to the outside world, other than observing it as sort of, when we'd go to school or go to town or whatever, like we observed it as an outsider. I mean, we're in the world, but we're still not part of the world.
Right.
But the real exposure, the real sort of like, what is life like inside those English houses? I didn't have that much access other than, between age 3 and 4. So I got that glimpse through reading books. And those were the characters and places that I read about, the things that I learned through the books. That was what I dreamed of becoming and doing. And I was 8 years old, for example, when I would watch the planes go by overhead and wonder what were the people doing inside the planes? Are they going to China or to one of those places I read about in the books? Things like that. And then at age 11, realized that I would never be able to fulfill my dreams, and that also, as a woman, I had no voice.
Yeah.
I would never ever have a voice.
So that brings up two questions, and I guess the first one would be: is there pressure to get baptized by a certain age?
Yes. So there, again, it depends on the community, the family, the church, or whatever. Generally, from some kids get baptized at age 17, 18. Others don't get baptized until later when they want to get married inside the church, they have to get baptized first if they aren't already. So if you're from a bigger community with lots of teenagers and you have peer support to break the rules, a lot of them wait until they're older to get baptized. But in my case, specifically, because I had tried to escape once, I had a failed first attempt. After that, my mother was on my case night and day to get baptized. And I was only 15 at that time. And in that community, they were trying to push the kids into getting baptized earlier because there's this constant fear. Well, if a kid is unhappy or dissatisfied, like, let's pressure him. Let's pressure him into getting baptized, because then that will, now your fate is sealed. Now you have vowed to remain a practicing Amish person for the rest of your life until your death. So now we can relax and we don't have to worry that you're going to leave. And my mother tried to push me into getting baptized earlier. And I knew there's no way that I could get baptized, or it would cut off certain access I would have later on in life for the work that I'm doing now. For example, I would not be able to do business with other practicing members of the church if I were baptized.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Get them in, get them roped in early.
Yeah.
So that there's that pressure, behind that person.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think they allow the access to books? That just really strikes me as a chink in the armor. It seems like a weak spot to allow if you learn English and then you can start reading other things. It seems like it kind of fosters a desire for something else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just surprised that they allow that. Has that ever been an issue?
Yeah, so that once again is something. The kind of access you have depends on the community once again, and on the specific family as well. And for context, the Amish used to send their kids to school until the 1972 Supreme Court ruling, Wisconsin versus Yoder, allowed Amish parents to remove their children from public schools and for the Amish to create their own schools and their own curriculum with zero oversight. And my mother, for example, grew up going to public school. She has a public school education. And what I learned many years later was that my mother's side of the family are actually very pro-education. And they love learning. If they were not members of the Amish church, they would be your typical sort of like professors and academic types, and which is a great loss to the world that we're deprived of those gifts.
Oh, absolutely.
And so my mother, because she grew up with that education, and she would talk to me, especially when I was younger, about her teacher, Mrs. Nolan. So I'm the oldest of the kids. So my mother was very much, for all her other faults and terrible things about her, one thing she did right was educate me. And she introduced me to all the books that she had read as a child and in public school. So I don't think that she made the connection, because she had exposure to all those books. She was exposed to all those books. She was exposed to public school education. She had an English teacher, and she still remained, a good girl inside the Amish church. So it never occurred to her that her daughter would depart from that.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So you mentioned departing from that. That kind of takes me back to, you said, so you made an attempt around 15 to escape.
Yes.
Can you take us through what that is like? What does it take, for someone like me? I don't know. What does it take to escape? And then what is it like when that escape, what's it feel like? It seems like it would be just such a a heavy burden
Yeah.
for it
Yeah.
not to work out for you.
Yeah. It was just, yeah, I don't have the words, like the worst kind of feeling.
Yeah.
It's, imagine growing up, where you're owned by somebody, like a slave, for example, or maybe you're even in modern current day, there's, human trafficking that goes on like crazy. This isn't just something from other eras. So imagine that sort of situation, and when you try to escape and you get stopped, I mean, what is going to happen to you? Of course, like, it's the worst feeling. And that's not, I don't even have words for it. It's just this, like, if I painted it, it would be black and dark clouds and heavy stuff on just a blank, like on a square, like sort of palette, like where it's
Right.
just, there's no color on there except black and variations of black.
So yeah, no, I can totally understand. I mean, that just
Yeah.
sounds so depressing. So what was the
And
attempt? Can you describe what happened?
yes, so this was in when I had, let me think here. So shortly after I turned 15, I made a phone call to, late at night. It was around, well, in the evening, around 7 p.m. or so in the evening. I made a phone call to one of the non-Amish taxi drivers. So every Amish community has non-Amish drivers to drive them around if they can't do the commute with a horse and buggy. So I called one of the substitute taxi drivers and asked her if she could take me to Holland the next morning, early the next morning, to catch a Greyhound bus. And this person was, I didn't know if I could trust her or not, which is why I didn't make the phone call until that just the night before. And she said, "Oh my God, I wish you would have called a little bit earlier. I could have totally taken you down if, but I have to take my kids to school in the morning, and I can't, make other arrangements. It's too late to make any other arrangements." So I was like, "Okay, don't worry about it. I'll find someone else. No big deal." And of course, there was no one else to call.
Right.
I go to bed that night. Everybody's in bed that night. It's 10 o'clock, around 10 o'clock or a little bit later, something like that. All of a sudden, I hear a vehicle pull up in the drive. And I hear a knock. Lights turn on, like, knock on the door downstairs. And I prop my window open because my room was right there above the drive. And I heard, my father's voice. I didn't hear what was being said, but I was like, "Oh my God, this is that lady." And I, of course, thought she had come to rat me out because that's the mindset you have. Is, as a kid, you think everybody else knows your rules too, and that may have been breaking the rules, or like, you're 15 years old. Why are you going to Holland on your own? And I just, crawled back into bed and tried to, like, pray, "Please God, don't let this be, what I think it is. Hope, blah, 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 blah." Like, it was like trying to just blur out everything and make the world stop and try to go back in time and make it never have happened that I made that call. And like several, 10 minutes later or something, I hear this slow stump, 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 stump up the steps upstairs. And my room was down the corner around it, sort of an L-shaped hallway. And I'm, praying that, okay, the steps are going to stop. It's just my father wanting something with one of my brothers or sisters. No, it keeps on coming down. Stump, stump, stump. And that night, I got no sleep. My father made me stay up all night. Talk about sleep deprivation and all sorts of other kinds of interrogation techniques to try to break you. Where were you going? Like, why were you going to leave, or where were you going to go? You need to tell me everything. And in that moment, I knew that I could either confess everything and pretend to be the perfect good girl from then on, to try to make my second attempt successful, so they would think that I had reformed and I was now no longer had any, thoughts of leaving, or I could just be outright, F you. And when you're that in their face, where you're just like, F you, like, you're not going to tell me what to do anymore. I mean, if you go to that extreme, what are they going to do? You can't be in the middle. It had to be one extreme or the other. The perfect good girl who's completely and totally, fully reformed, or the perfect, like, F you all to hell. And I chose the good girl route because I wanted my parents to know that I left because something was very, very wrong. I left because there's some serious shit that's going on inside the church. There are major issues in the church and in our home that is not right. The abuses I suffered, endured, the physical violence and verbal violence in the name of discipline, and the psychological and brainwashing, religious brainwashing, those things, not to mention the sexual assault that runs rampant in the Amish church. Those are wrong things, and you cannot claim to be the perfect people and the godly people when you're allowing that shit to happen.
Absolutely.
And that there was a reason for me to leave, a valid reason, that I could not be part of the hypocrisy. And it wasn't just a rebellious teenage act. I had thought these things through, and I had already read the Bible from cover to cover at age 11, and, figured out that this is not the way to live if you actually believe Jesus' basic teachings of being kind and compassionate. If you choose to believe that's what he actually said, but that's how I interpreted it at that age. And so I thought, okay, well, this is going to, having this long-term view, this being the good girl would be the only way to try to get the point across after I escape. So this is going to come as a complete and utter surprise once I do make my second attempt. And, surely at that point, they can think about, well, this wasn't just some rebellious teenager. Like, what happened? It would make them change and wake up, which it didn't. So in retrospect, I wish I would have just said, fuck you all to hell.
Well, what would have happened then? I was trying to play that one out in my head when you said it. You give them the big fuck you. Do they kick you out? What would they do to you or with you at that point? If you're seen as just unruly and unmanageable, uncontrollable, what do they do?
Well, I would have loved it if they kicked me out. I
Gotcha.
wanted to, or they would have said, no, you can't be here anymore. In fact, actually, it wouldn't have been that. I wouldn't even have been there. I would have just said, fuck you, I'm leaving right tonight anyway. Like, I would have just packed up and left that night.
And that's an option. So you could have done that.
Well, it's not an option that they would have given me. It's an option I would have taken. I would have said, fuck you.
Gotcha.
Like, you're not standing in my way. I'm packing up my shit right now, and I will call the police on you if you try to stop me.
Gotcha. You mentioned...
I take that back a little bit. I didn't even know I could call the police. Now, This is what I want kids to know, is that you can call the police about these things. Not that they would have helped. That's another whole story. But
there's a moment in another episode I did with a lady who escaped the FLDS cult, and this just really reminds me of something she said, and it was a moment where she realized that, the power they had was the power she gave them to an extent, and that there are laws in the United States and that, maybe she couldn't call the local police because they were pretty much owned by the FLDS.
Exactly, yeah.
But she could call the state troopers or whatever. And there were people out there that legally could do something.
Well, yeah, but I would just like want to add my commentary to that is I don't want listeners to buy into it that the power they had is the power we give them. We children don't have that awareness. At least we Amish
Well, at this
children.
point, she was an adult.
Okay, okay.
Right,
Yeah,
right. No, I
but
understand technically. Of course, they took the power from us. They never gave us anything to begin with as
right, yeah,
kids.
and
Yeah.
right, and they keep us repressed and oppressed and ignorant and all of that,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they tell us that everything on the outside is evil and bad, and they do own the police as well. They're in cahoots with the police. If any Amish kid gets into trouble with the law, like the agreement is that the police report it to the bishop, and the bishop, we handle our own crimes, which they don't. I mean,
Oh, really? So they have the police in their pocket as
yes,
well. Oh,
yes.
wow. So,
Even Child Protective Services will not show up if they get a call from an Amish child, and that's completely against the law. That's against federal and state laws. I mean, that's an issue that we're addressing through the Amish Heritage Foundation and the conference in September, and we'll be talking about here are the issues.
this is just a little bit of an aside, but you mentioned how kind, let's say in the Bible, Jesus was. Kind of the opposite of the culture and environment you felt that you were in.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this may, of course, vary over groups or whatever, but do Amish consider themselves Christians?
Yes. So the Amish are a form of Protestant Christianity. It's
Okay.
their own interpretation. So we grow up with the Old and New Testament, and we're told to read it but not analyze it.
Don't think too hard.
Right, exactly. And to make it add another interesting level to that, in the very strict communities, they don't allow you to read in English. And in the super strict, some offshoots of the Amish, Swartz and Trooper Amish, for example, is one of them, where you're not even allowed to read the Bible in English, and the Bible that you are supposed to read is in German, which is not Amish. I mean, I can read German. I don't understand German, or very little of it. And so it's very similar to the situation with the Catholic Church way back when they had Mass in Latin, and the peasants, or the illiterate, couldn't understand what was going on, and they were told this is what the Bible says when it didn't actually say that.
Wow. So you have now made an attempt to escape. You made an unsuccessful attempt, and you have gotten through, you're sitting at the table or sitting there with your dad all night talking about this. How do you transition from I'm leaving to being that good girl? And how did you work that out to where you essentially got their trust, so that if you did make a second attempt, you could not only kind of make a point in that here this good girl left, but also be more successful in that attempt?
Correct. So that all night sleep deprivation thing took place in my room, not at the table. The table scene was
Right.
clear, when I got ransacked, and all my stuff got confiscated. My diary, a horrible sin of sins. So what happens in the early morning hours? I'm up all night. I'm being forced to stay awake all night. I'm not allowed to fall asleep all night long. And in the morning, one of the taxi drivers comes, along to pick up my mother, my father, me, and a couple elders of the community, and we go off to a neighboring church's bishop. So not the bishop of our community, but some other neighboring community's bishop, who runs a who's a therapist to troubled teens, Amish teens, and that's another bullshit joke beyond jokes. There's no such thing as mental health services in the Amish. I mean, there's a little bit more now than there used to be over 20 years ago when I had to go see this bishop. And also, I just have to qualify and say it that the mental health services that are provided is only provided in the context of you must remain. This is why you should stay inside the church. And it's, of course, not administered by anyone who's had any training.
Well, of course not.
So this bishop, self-proclaimed therapist to troubled teens, sits me down and, well, tell me what happened and why did you want to leave and blah, blah, blah. He's like all pompous and thinks he's like really, something. And, and I see like right through, I knew exactly what I needed to do, how I needed to behave, what answers I needed to give him in order to be pronounced reformed and cured.
Of course.
And I had to make it into a game in order to not go insane and lose it. So I just, had this running commentary in my head while he's asking me these questions. And I created this little competition for myself. I wonder how quickly I can get him to say that, okay, she's completely, she's cured, she's reformed, no more therapy sessions. And I believe I did it in 2 sessions.
Oh, wow. He's not a very good therapist. He's not very discerning.
Or I was damn good.
That's right. You played him.
And of course, having that secret victory soothed, the pain a little bit of, just this failed attempt. And I was put under Amish house arrest, which, means I was never allowed to do anything by myself, be alone without adult supervision, and baptized adult members. I could not be alone with my friends. I had to quit my job at the bakery and was never allowed to even go bike up the road to the Amish farmers to pick up milk, nothing. I had to always be either with my mother, my father, or some other church member.
Wow. Is there a time limit on that?
The time limit was 9 months later when I made my second and then successful escape.
Oh, wow. So that would have been what until maybe you got, assuming you didn't, make another attempt, would that have just been until maybe you got baptized or?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Throughout all this time, there was this serious, heavy lobbying, and my mother used the whole, well, she manipulated that, like, well, you're now like this reformed or whatever, like you've agreed to abide by the rules and see the error of your ways and blah, blah, blah. And now, you need to get baptized. And it was all like, she would not let up on it. And it got to the point where it's like, I could not maintain my good girl, image if I did not get baptized. Like I had to escape before the next class for kids started to get baptized, and that was the only. So from September through May, that was the period in which my mother was just lobbying and pressuring me to get baptized, join the baptism class in the spring or in the summer, like the next one that would start up.
That must have been some intense pressure. I can only imagine because you have a desperate mother who's really trying to corral her child. And, you on the other hand are so intent on not being in that, not living that life. So
Yeah.
how did that progress as you went on? So I mean, I guess you knew you had X amount of time if you wanted to make another attempt. How did
Right.
you plan that out, and how did you end up executing that?
So my plan was the plan was to leave via the Ludington car ferry. So in Michigan, that was the community we lived in at the time, was located near Lake Michigan, Ludington, which had a car ferry service that took you across to Wisconsin. And one of my uncles who had left the church, one of my paternal uncles, Enos Bontrager is his name. Remember that name because we're going to get back to it. He had agreed, or I knew that he was on that side and that I could call him to pick me up once I got to that side. And I could bike to Ludington. It was like 9 miles or something, not very far. So that was my plan. But the car ferry service only was seasonal only and would not start up again until May. And the baptism class was going to start right around that time. I wasn't sure exactly when it was going to start. I believe it was like summer or something like that. And 2 weeks before the car ferry season starts up, my parents moved to a completely different location in Michigan.
Oh no.
And that was another reason why I wanted to play play the good girl. If I was going to play the good girl, I wanted to keep playing the good girl so we wouldn't move, because that was the only way I could get away, was once this car ferry season started up. And if we moved and went somewhere else, then I wouldn't be familiar with the geography. There wouldn't be something like that available. Access to public transportation is basically non-existent in the Amish. How are these kids going to get to a Greyhound or Amtrak or something like that? I mean, it's pretty difficult to do that. So throughout the 9 months, my parents, of course, like, they started eventually, despite me pretending that, I was 100% committed to staying inside the church, they decided that they were going to look for a different community. And the community that we lived in at the time, that Ludington community, had lots of problems. There were horrible things going on. I mean, there's this whole other backstory that we didn't even get into. But I was like, there's lots of disputes among the members and all of that. And a lot of people were thinking about moving anyway. But then when I tried to have that failed attempt, then that just escalated the timetable for my parents, for example. And that's the typical solution for parents of children who have attempted to escape. Oh, well, let's move. That fixes all our problems. Like, any problem, like, just move. That's going to, like, automatically fix everything. And so we moved to a community just outside of Lansing, which is way down south of the state, or towards further down south. And I didn't know anybody. In terms of, like, who are the taxi drivers and where's the nearest train station or bus station, how to even get there, all that kind of stuff. And their baptism class was going to start up that month.
No pressure, no pressure.
Yeah. And I believe that was another part of the reason, is because of all the disputes going on in the Ludington church amongst the members. They, a part of it was, I'm not sure if they were even offering a baptism class that year or not, or whatever. So that had something to do with it. And yeah, so I'm like, what am I going to do? Well, luckily my good girl act paid off, because once we moved to that lower Michigan community outside of Lansing, I was allowed to go work in the Amish bakery again, that one down there, and out of sight of adult supervision. I was allowed to be on my bike again. Oh, well, we trust you now. We're all going to try to make a new start, and blah, blah, blah. And part of it too was, though, looking back, it was my father trying to project this, oh, we're a perfect family image, and blah, 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 So if they didn't let me go to the bakery because the Amish people had, needed someone to help them, then, they would have to explain, the issue. Oh, well, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, like how
No,
it is.
no, that totally makes sense, because that would have been a black eye on the family if they admitted from the get-go, from day one, that you weren't the perfect child.
Right, that I wasn't reformed, because everybody already knew I'd tried to escape. I mean, word, travels through the grapevine faster than the internet,
Oh, really? Wow. So they already knew that down there?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
everybody knew because it was the same, everybody, I mean, the gossip is galore. I mean, you think like TMZ is gossip.
Well, no, I get that, because I mean, I know gossip is really bad among Jehovah's Witnesses. There's not a lot going on in life,
Exactly, yeah.
You gotta talk
But
about something.
yeah, but see, it was like this. This bishop pronounced her cured or whatever, reformed, and like we parents, like we're like the perfect parents too, because like we've made it, like we have this perfect relationship with our child now, and
Of course.
and so if they and the bakery people needed me, they were dependent on finding someone to help them, and it would not be Amish Christian, Amish should not help your those in need. um
Just being a good Amish girl.
and so the one clincher was that the house we moved to wasn't Amishified yet. I
Oh,
mean,
really?
it was, 'cause the Amish don't always build their own houses. Like they'll buy existing houses and then like just turn off the electricity and remove whatever appliances aren't allowed to be in there and replace them, for example.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't happen to like the very, very super strict ones. I'm not sure if they allow that. Probably nowadays because of just economic reasons. It's tough to build a house from the ground up. But yeah, so until we got our new phone line in the barn hooked up, we kept the phone line active inside the house for business purposes because we need, to be able to take business calls for the.
Of course.
So I was screwed. I'm like, I can't make phone calls during the night to my uncle Harvey Bell in Montana. And all this time I'd been calling him collect at night. I've been sneaking out of the house, and I knew that I could be out in Montana with him once I did figure out how to escape on this end. So I was just like, okay, I have no car ferry service. I don't know how to get to anywhere around here, and I can't even make phone calls, and this baptism class is starting up, and I just can't take it anymore. I was just getting to that edge for me where I was like, I can't make it inside anymore. So luckily for me, because of the bakery, I got that little bit of freedom, and I would bike past the Amish schoolhouse, which had a phone in the schoolhouse for all the Amish to use. And so I stopped in at the schoolhouse and made my calls to both uncles, and I called my Wisconsin uncle Enos and told him, like if I could leave tonight, I would. Like I just can't take it anymore. And he said, if I came over and picked you up tonight, would you really leave? And I'm like, I had this moment of like, oh shit, like
It just got real.
would I? I mean, like, I can't not say no, but it was like so unexpected. So the whole escape did not go at all as how I had planned. So I go home that night, and I leave the schoolhouse, I bike on home, and I had packed all my things that I wanted to take with me into a little box when we made the move from Ludington to just outside Lansing, and I didn't unpack that. I knew that this was what I would take with me, so I kept it in that box. And so it was just a matter of getting my birth certificate and social security card and vaccination card out of the safe, and try to find a moment when I could sneak into the safe downstairs when my mother wasn't around and none of the kids were looking, and take that stuff out, those documents. And so I did that, and the whole night was just surreal. Like it's actually a little bit hard to remember that night because it happened so fast. And until, I went to bed, I remember not being able to fall asleep. I set the alarm and finally did fall asleep, and all of a sudden woke up and freaked out because I thought I had slept through the alarm.
Yeah, oh wow, that would just be so much panic.
Yeah, and in fact, I had somehow gotten the little hand and the big hand turned around that night. So nervous, and my uncle had told me that he'd meet me at a certain time, and he had mentioned on the phone, and he said, I'll wait all night. If for some reason you don't show up at the allotted time, and it was like around 1 o'clock, I believe it was, something like that. He said, I'll wait until morning. And I had told him at the time, I was like, oh no, I'm going to be there. I'll be there. There's no way this is not going to happen. And I was, so happy that he had mentioned that and thought of that. And so I, woke up in this panic, and I got together my stuff, and I had to sneak down these creaky stairs that,
of course.
yeah, and the whole, story, you can read the story like in my basic Escape from the Amish interview that Tim Ferriss did quite a few years ago, but you can find that on his blog. But it was, I had to go down these creaky little stairs, and I'd memorize all the spots that squeak no matter how much WD-40 I'd put on them. And ended down in the living area, and then had to cross the dining room and into the kitchen to go out the back door and circle around the house to try to circle around the edge of the yard and maintain cover. Because the moon was shining that night. It was almost a full moon, or an actual full moon. So it was pretty bright outside. And so I ran down half a mile. I couldn't take my box of all my prized possessions, the only things I cared about, I couldn't carry with me, because I could not risk, what if once I'm downstairs, I'm crossing over through the dining room and one of my parents wakes up and sees me. How am I going to explain a box? I could explain I'm going to the kitchen to get a drink of water, but right. The box, I was not going to be successful that night. So I just had the clothes on my back, like $170 that I took out of my father's wallet that night, and my little sort of laptop size duffel. I mean, it's not a duffel bag. It was kind of like a briefcase size kind of thing that I took with me with my documents and a couple personal items, and that was it. And to end the story, I mean, I know it's like 3:39, so.
Oh, that's no worries.
Well, I actually have to wrap it up too, because I have another meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, so otherwise I'd be talking longer. But so I just want to add that there's plenty of information out there about my story. You can just Google my name, Torah Bontrager, and you can also go to my website and you can find the links to all the interviews I've done before, as well as the Huffington Post one. And the Huffington Post one, I want to point that out because that's where I talk about how my uncle Enos Bontrager started raping me. And I also talk about my uncle.
Oh, God. Your uncle who you escaped with?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. So so here's all this stuff, that goes on and goes into trying to escape, and you think you're going to a place that you have somebody understands you, gets you, and you're going to be safe. In less than a month, Harvey is raping me in Montana, and that to this day, I don't know how often, because it was just, from May through December until I figured out how to escape him, because the first night, after the first night, he told me, if you ever tell anyone, I'm going to kill you. And that bought my silence. He was violent and like I had no doubt that he would kill me or send someone after to kill me if he ever suspected I'd ever go to the police or tell anyone.
So how did you get away from him?
Well, so I during a winter break from high school, I finally figured out a plan, which was to use the excuse that there are no jobs for high school students during the winter in Montana, which is true. There were no jobs. It was, it's this very, very tiny town and just thrived on tourism during the summers. And my argument was, that I wanted to be self-sufficient, independent, and make some money. And I called Enos in Wisconsin, the uncle who helped me escape that night. I called him and asked him, hey, would you be able to give me some work after school in your furniture shop? And he says, yes. So I got that confirmation from him and then told Harvey, his older brother. I already talked to Enos. He said, yes, come, that they'll pay for the ticket for me to go to Wisconsin. And that I presented it in a way that did not threaten him, clearly, because I was still alive. And I got to Wisconsin. My Harvey was divorced, didn't have kids in the house. It was just me in the house. I mean, I was in another, once again, talk about being in prison and feeling like a hostage. And Enos, on the other hand, was married and had kids. So I thought, it never once occurred to me that the same thing would happen with him. The first time his wife, Barb, goes on an overnight business trip, he does the same thing. And it was just like, once again, like no words to describe like how that feels. It's like one of the thoughts that crossed my mind was just, I guess this is just what uncles do. And I couldn't go to the police because Harv would kill me. If I reported Enos, then, that would alert him.
So Harvey was doing it too?
Harvey did it from May through December when I was in Montana. Because what happened was Enos had picked me up in Michigan, took me to Wisconsin, and put me on a train out to Harvey. So that happened within the span of four days during my escape.
Good.
And yeah. So I just waited out the semester. I couldn't not be in school because my emancipation was dependent upon me staying in school. So when I was 16 years old, I became emancipated as a minor, which is why I say, my parents, even if it weren't a legal status, my parents are not my parents. They're my ex-parents. It's like divorcing your parents.
Right.
So I got all the rights as an 18-year-old, as long as I didn't break the law, as long as I abided by the rules that that an 18-year-old have to abide by, including I had to be in school until I was at least 18. So if I dropped out of school in an effort to get away from Enos, I would lose that. And besides, where was I? I didn't even know who to go to. I mean, I didn't have my driver's license. I didn't have a job. Yeah.
God. So you end up, I mean, I know you're on a time crunch here. So how is it that you eventually end up away from all of these people?
Yeah. Well, as soon as school was over, then I, by that time, had established contact with some people in the Wisconsin community that I lived at as an Amish kid before my parents moved to Michigan. So it was another part of Wisconsin. So some of those, the Amish there had left the church, and one of them that I went to school with, actually, he was married by then. They needed a babysitter. So that was my way to I had a place to stay. they let me live there in exchange for babysitting, and so I would babysit part-time, like whenever they were at work, and then I looked for a job at the same time, some other job. I mean, I always had like 3 jobs, trying to support myself.
Well,
So.
sure. When you don't have a lot of secular education, it makes it more difficult to earn enough of a living.
Well, yes, and also I couldn't get any jobs that paid anything beyond minimum
Yeah,
wage.
that's what I'm
And
saying.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean that's a big problem with Jehovah's Witnesses too. So I totally understand that. It's hard to find your place financially in that
yeah,
situation.
yeah, yeah.
So you get free from everybody. How long have you been out now?
22 years.
Wow,
So May 24 was my 22nd anniversary, 22nd year anniversary.
that's awesome. And now, how many years were you in?
Uh, 15.
15.
Like it was like the year I turned 16, so about several months before my 16th birthday, so it's like almost 16 years. So
Gotcha.
I've now officially, I mean, I've officially been out of the church longer than I've been in,
Yeah,
but
that's what I was getting at. I really like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I remember thinking about that for year, like right as within the first year of my escape, thinking, wow, I wonder what it'd be like once I hit the 15-year mark, where it'd be like equal. And it seems like such a long time ago, and at the same time it seems like not much time has passed by, because it's very easy for me to um, go back in time. I sort of like time travel in that sense, where I still speak English or Amish fluently. So that's one of the things. I still speak Amish fluently. I've not, you know, uh, removed myself in that sense. Whereas, so it's easy for me to go back into those memories, or remember the good things about the stuff, or think about the kids, how I can help them, or what needs they have. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, I don't quite know how to explain it. I mean, definitely, I'm very culturally Amish. I've always maintained that, and it's been important for me to maintain that.
So, what do you like about your life on the outside? What do you like about, the freedom that you have now?
I what do I like about the freedom that I
Well,
have now? That
obviously freedom itself is
I have
something to
freedom.
like, but I mean, what are you doing? What kind of lights your fire? What gets you excited about this life?
I the that's such a good question that I'm trying to think of how to answer. I mean, I just love learning. That's always been who I am, is to learn and just like experience everything that there is to experience, and do everything there is to do. I mean, like I have so many dreams and things on my wish list, and so many innate talents I have that I haven't yet had time or resources to develop. Music, for example, is high on my list. I mean, that's my childhood dream, is to become a musician,
Oh,
which
that's
still
awesome.
hasn't happened. And I don't feel that like my life is not going to be, I won't have done what I was meant to do until I've you know I've become a musician, or done that. I feel, so everything else that I've done is amazing, and huge accomplishments. Going to an Ivy League school. I mean, just the fact that I even like managed to do a year of high school is incredible for an Amish kid.
Yeah, yeah.
um, like learning how to fly a plane at age 18, traveling to about 30 countries, living in New York City and loving it. And now, doing writing a memoir, which is hard work. I mean, harder than I ever thought it would be. All things. I mean, I've experienced a lot. I've lived a very good life, in terms of all the things that I wanted to do when I was a little kid. I mean, I've done it, except becoming a musician, which is my very original dream.
Well, I have to say that that's really impressive, to be able to do all these things at such a young age and to have so much time to pursue now, what you want to pursue. I know that you're doing this interview ahead of this Amish conference that's coming up. Can you tell us a little bit about the conference, about what you're hoping to discuss, about maybe some of the issues that you want to tackle, or just what is it that people should be looking forward to?
Yeah, so the name of the conference is Disrupting History, Reclaiming Our Amish Story. So that's exactly what we're doing.
I like that.
We're taking back our story, which has been co-opted by academia, so-called expert authorities on the Amish. Just Google them and their names will pop up. They're not experts on us Amish, and they have no right to call themselves that. And they've written our story, like the narrative of us Amish has been determined by them, and also the entertainment industry, reality TV, for example, and comedy, where we're just a laugh line, and those issues need to be rectified. I mean, these are serious issues. Where there's this collusion of what we call church and state, the outside co-opting our story and colluding with the state to allow the Amish as a people to remain frozen in time. So Wisconsin versus Yoder really sealed that fate by it was basically just the outside, the state, the federal, the Supreme Court level saying, well, we embrace ignorance and that's great for the Amish, and never mind that we're actually U.S. citizens. I mean, what about the rights of the children? So it's really about addressing those forces that are happening. So it's not just the Amish clergy, elders, or whatever violating the rights of children. It's also the state and the federal government. And
because they pandered to that religious pressure.
Well, yeah, both pander to it, and both also just for their own purposes, because of whatever other political agendas other groups had. It was easy to latch on to as Amish, because that was we were not engaged with the world. There was no representation in the courtroom for us children during Wisconsin versus Yoder. No representation. And even though the U.S. is the only country in the world that hasn't ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, I mean, even Somalia has ratified that. I mean, for God's sake. Not expect them to uphold it, but at least they signed on the line. The U.S. hasn't. Despite that, there was still a law at that time, and still is, I believe, that children need to be represented. Like, somebody needs to be speaking on behalf, advocating for the child in a situation like that, and no one did. So this is serious. I mean, like, real heavy, serious issues that we're addressing. So it's going to be, this educational issue, and then talking about sexual abuse, for example, especially with Me Too. Now people finally understand, the general public understands sexual abuse issues in a way it never did before. So it's going to be much easier to talk about that now, thanks to the Me Too movement. And then just about women's rights, the fact that women do not have any rights at all inside the Amish church. This is 2018. We're in one of the westernized countries, supposedly the freest country in the world, and there's a population, an entire people that do not have any rights as women.
Right.
So
when can you give us the whens and wheres and of the convention that's coming up? I mean, is it something? It seems like it would be a good idea to go ahead and kind of plug that for those, especially in your audience, who might listen.
Yeah, so if you're listening, please go buy your ticket. There's an early bird ticket sale going on through August 30. And we'd love for you to come. You can go to the website, www.amishheritage.org, or you can Google my name and you will find us everywhere. Your tickets, you can get those on Eventbrite or on Facebook or on our website. And it's a 2-day conference, September 28, 29 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Easy access from DC, New York, and Baltimore, anywhere in the Northeast region via Amtrak or car. And it's going to be awesome. Our keynote speakers on Friday, the keynote speaker is a Pulitzer-nominated author and attorney, Marcy Hamilton. And Saturday's keynote is Galen Gingrich, who's a member on the Council of Foreign Relations and a Unitarian Universalist minister in New York City. So it's going to be very interesting. And he wrote a book, by the way, called God Revised. So for anyone wondering, it's going to be a very interesting conversation.
No, that's really cool. Now, I'm going to give you one chance here. You talked about taking back, your own story as Amish people. If you had a moment here to correct some misconception or something that was out there that you would like to speak to, feel free to go ahead and do that now.
Rumspringa. It's not what you think it is or we're told it is.
Really?
Not at all. So come to the conference if you want to find out what Rumspringa actually is or means. Otherwise, shoot me an email or go on social media. Ask. I mean, we would love the conversation to be public.
Okay, you said go on social media. Where would someone ask you on social media? Where would be the best place?
Look for Twitter. The Amish Heritage Foundation. I think that the handle is Amish Heritage. No, I take that back. On Twitter, the handle is Amish Foundation.
Okay.
And you can also find the Facebook page. The handle on Facebook is Amish Heritage Foundation.
All right. Amish Heritage Foundation. All right. Well, I will make sure that all of this gets posted up so that people have an opportunity, to have that conversation, because I think Rumspringa is and I hope I said it anywhere near close enough.
You did.
I hope that, that I know that that's something that is a fascinating concept as far as what most people know about it. But I think it would be really interesting to hear from you exactly what that is. So if somebody else doesn't ask the question, I will. So
yeah, awesome. Yeah, it in short, it perpetuates the problems. It adds to the issues instead of, we're not given a choice. But let's have the conversation online.
All right. That sounds great. Well, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you reaching out, to do this and for sharing as much of your story as you could in the time that, was provided. And I just wish you the best. And I hope that your conference is a huge success.
Thank you. Yeah, I thank you so much. It's been really awesome to have this conversation, and I appreciate it.
As always, I want to thank Torah for being so open about her story. I know it's not always easy to relive the past. A lot of us have some really painful, sometimes ugly things in our past. But, the past kind of informs our present. And when we discuss these things openly, we let other people know that they're not alone. So it was beautiful to hear her be able to share some of her story. I hope that it helps others. I just recently started a Facebook group called Shunned Podcast, where we can actually all get together and share our stories, support each other, even across these different groups. So please join in. Just look it up on Facebook. It's entitled Shunned Podcast. It's 2 words. It is a private group. I will have to approve you, but no worries there. We're already doing some things like discussing career challenges, encouraging self-care on the weekends, sharing what we're doing there. Some of the previous guests are there. You can say hi to them. You can also tell some of your own story if you like. It's not just a typical XJW group, not necessarily focused on following the ins and outs of what the cult does. It's about us. It's about our stories. It's a place focused on personal story that's kind of reflective of the podcast itself. So come join in no matter what group you come from. Again, the Facebook group is called Shunned Podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do so in various ways. One way is to leave a positive review on iTunes. When you put a review up on iTunes, it helps us raise in the rankings. And by doing so, then maybe other people who are looking for help can also find us. So it's really a pretty important thing to do. The other thing that you can do is go to patreon.com/shunned. And there you can support the show financially for as little as $1 a month. The money that I get, I put right back into the show. Believe me, I'm not getting wealthy off this. But I use this money to go for things like the website, for hosting. And, we've got this big push where we're doing transcriptions so that we can have more content on the site for SEO, which means more people can possibly find us. The next episode that I'm going to release will be out around the beginning of October. It's going to feature Lindy, a former Jehovah's Witness. She's had an interesting life, and now we've all been shunned by various people. But one thing I haven't covered yet, I don't think, is a person who is shunned by their own daughter. And that it's one thing to be shunned by your former witness friends. It's one thing to be shunned maybe by your own family who raised you, but when you raise someone and then they're around a cult, they become one of those people, and then they shun you when you leave. That's another dimension. And Lindy has a really interesting project that she had put together to try to reach her daughter someday, so we'll also feature that. The music today for the show is by Fair Voyeur. It's entitled No Hell Yet. And if you'd like to hear my personal story, you can do so by listening to the podcast called This JW Life. It's also found at thisjwlife.com. Both the Shun podcast and This JW Life can be found on YouTube now. You can find them at Shun Podcast, one word, or This JW Life. And I even do some in-person videos now. I do some video casts on the Shun channel, so at Shun Podcast on YouTube. So let's go ahead and send this out like I do all of them. Love others, do no harm, and go be happy.